Tomorrow, of course, is Democratic debate number 5, and in the run-up, President Barack Obama issued a warning to candidates, asserting that, quote, certain liberal policy proposals have gone further left than public opinion.
This is still a country that is less revolutionary than it is interested in improvement. They like seeing things improved, but the average American doesn't think that we have to completely tear down the system and remake it. And I think it's important for us not to lose sight of that.
Polling of the American electorate may say otherwise, showing that Medicare for all, free higher education, living wage are actually quite popular. And according to Adolph Reed Jr., Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania, centrist Democrats and left identitarians are bound in a shared embrace of the particularist, elite-driven politics. He joins us now to expand on that. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great to have
Absolutely.
you here,
So, I mean, what was your particular reaction to that quote? I know you've been quite critical of President Obama, I mean, from basically from the very beginning, right? And so, I mean, it's not a surprise that he would say something like this, but what's your counter?
Well, I mean, not at all. I mean, one of the most compelling facts about 2008 was that Obama got more Wall Street money than anybody else. When I mentioned that to people at the time, they said, well, yes, but, right? He's never been a leftist. Once I actually had to read his 2 memoirs, I mean, there was a kind of standard trope that he played with, pointing to the left to disparage them to prove that he's like Goldilocks, basically. He's not too far left, he's not too far right. So in that sense, it's not at all surprising that President Obama takes that view. The thing that most intrigues me about, or that I think is most telling about the Democratic race this time, however, is how many of the so-called moderate or centrist or whatever the term of art is, I mean, these days, candidates seem pretty clearly to be less frightened by a Trump re-election than by an election of the left. And it's also becoming more clear that the left in this race is Bernie Sanders.
What makes you say that some of the moderates and centrists are more afraid of a Bernie Sanders presidency than a Donald Trump re-elect?
Well, one thing is that you guys, or something that you guys and others have pointed out, Bernie has gone invisible in media coverage, even when he finishes first in a poll, right? You know, all the corporate news is about who's jockeying for second and third.
Pete Buttigieg in a strong 4th. That was one of my favorites.
Totally. And the idea that anybody would take seriously this guy can win the presidency is like crazy. But I kind of feel the same way about Warren as well. She'll carry Cambridge, she'll carry Somerville, I'm not sure, and she'll carry the many different versions of Cambridge and Somerville that there are in the rest of the country. I'm not at all convinced that she could beat Trump, and you're certainly not going to beat Trump with rehearsing the same old Democratic bromides that we've seen since Clinton. And they've had pretty much the same effect since Clinton. Yeah,
so Professor, how do you square that? I mean, you very much are, I guess, kind of a product of Cambridge and these types of places. And so, and I mean, you're one of these people, and yet you're speaking out very much against this. Why is it that you cast so much doubt upon, because, I mean, realistically, the demographic is you. People like my parents, professors, who are like, oh, we love all these detailed plans. I mean, and yet you seem to understand that that is not a very desirable trait to a large majority of Americans. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, a couple of reasons. One of them is that, you know, people who fetishize plans, right, are embedded in a strain of liberal, capital P, progressivism that goes back to the end of the 19th century. Its ideal is that the smart people should really rule. They tend to avoid politics, right? They're frightened by politics and prefer to find technical fixes to what are basically political problems. And I think we can see that in Warren's campaign, like in the way that she's, you know, she has a beer with Elizabeth or whatever, but there's no real effort there to connect with the felt concerns, and again, not at the level of bromides, but you know, ordinary working people of all sorts. And I would say too that a lot of what gets called the middle class is actually the working class people who've been able to hold down a mortgage, right?
Right.
But
By the skin of their teeth and with a lot of credit card debt.
Right, exactly. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. I'd say this too, I mean, just as kind of a red herring, that a lot of the talk about how young people are drawn to Bernie also has an ethereal quality about it, right? That you know, the young can see that he's honest, right, and whatever. But the reality is, you know, we talk on one hand about the American standard of living having declined consistently over the last 40 years plus. Well, guess who's holding the short end of the stick? And I mean, what I've seen at rallies isn't the kind of sort of children of the corn like Obama mania that I saw like in 2008. Well, what I see in rallies now is young people going nuts on college campuses when Medicare for All comes up, or when free college tuition comes up, or when debt forgiveness comes up, or when the $15 an hour minimum wage comes up. And that's where the issues are. But the problem is, I mean, you probably know, and maybe a lot of your listeners do too. Luke Savage did a really nice article in Current Affairs a couple of years ago called "How Liberals Came to Love the West Wing," and I spent a lot of time down here, like in the early 2000s, and I saw in the rapidly transitioning U Street area, one day a bumper sticker that said "Martin Sheen is my president," and it's so telling because.
Oh yeah, that's.
And as Savage pointed out, right, like Bartlett and whatever his successor was, didn't win anything like in 8 years, right? But they won the conversation,
Right.
Yes.
And that's the problem with that kind of strain of liberals who frankly aren't all of our class, right? I mean, we're in the same class,
totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Democratic Party establishment and sort of the ruling class and donor class establishment would ultimately let Bernie win?
No. No. I mean, I think I think there's a good chance that they'd kill him if he won, or they'd kill him if he came close to winning. And I know that's probably freaking a lot of people out there that said that.
It's like, let's be careful.
Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, look, what's especially telling about the state of neoliberalism there I said the N-word, in distress now, it can't resolve its contradictions. It was never really committed, or it's a social order that's never really built on popular governance anyway, but just the opposite. And, you know, Brazil, Bolivia, the attacks in Argentina, Hungary, India, Turkey, keep going, right? I may have forgotten somebody. Boris Johnson, for God's sake, right? And from that perspective, and especially also because, as I said before, the Democratic elites and the corporate media, in the past couple of months even, just seem to have kicked the anti-Sanders campaign into higher gear. It's the cleverest way to do it, just by pretending he doesn't exist.
Right.
And look, my dad used to say that ideology is a mechanism that harmonizes the principles that you want to believe you hold and what advances your material interests. So the centrist Democratic elites now are convinced that the issue is who's electable, right? I mean, and they contend that Bernie couldn't win when there's no one else in this race who's actually appealing to popular concerns among working people. No one else gets the response that he gets. And so I guess the hidden clause, and they probably hide it from themselves, is that he couldn't win, couldn't win a Wall Street presidency, right? But the beauty of it is that since 1865, and especially 1965, the rest of us get to vote too.
Very well said.
All right, thank you, sir.
Great to have you.
Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to watching you guys all the time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
We really appreciate that. Next up on Rising, YouTuber Peter Coffin explains that while he doesn't think Senator Bernie Sanders is the perfect candidate, he is the one most able to achieve a progressive vision.
So Peter is going to explain all that next when Rising continues.